All right, excellent. This is going to be a great event, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's topic on this special Panelcast event is understanding current trends in public, private, hybrid, and multi-cloud computing. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator on this Panelcast. On this event, you'll hear from experts at Zerto, Nutanix, and SolarWinds. I'll be introducing you to those experts here in just a moment. Before we do, just a few things that you should know about the event. We want this to be educational. We want to help you get all your questions answered and solve your IT challenges. On the landing page for this event, we asked you what you'd like to learn. And honestly, we got over 200 responses, 200 different topics, or many of them similar, actually, on things that you'd like to learn related to public, private, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. There are a lot of questions, obviously, out there. And so we encourage you to use the questions box. We'll be doing our best to intersperse the questions that come in live during today's event, as well as to answer the top questions that we received from the landing page. So the questions we'll be answering during this event were submitted by everyone who registered. So thank you so much for those questions. We hope to help you get some answers. We also have some links there in your handouts tab to a PDF, as well as some links to our respective expert presenters landing pages. So make sure that you check those out, check out those handouts, and then we'll be announcing the winners of our 3 Amazon $100 gift cards at the end of the live presentation. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Before we get into it, just a little bit of stage setting here on this topic. I mean, everyone is excited about the possibility of cloud, and I think even more so this year with, of course, the worldwide pandemic. It has forced us to, innovate much more than ever before. But there's still a lot of confusion out there, right? We want to know. I think most of us are starting to understand, what the cloud is exactly. But there's so many different forms of cloud, hybrid, multi-cloud, which cloud is best, for me and my organization. We're still trying to justify, in many cases, the why. Is moving an application, or let's say a database, for example, to the public cloud, is that the right thing for my company? How do I justify it? And trying to determine exactly how it's going to work over time. That's another big question, the how. Many of us are still getting up to speed on cloud security, cloud compliance, how to administer just a hybrid cloud environment, where we're going to put our data, where in the world, where in the United States, for example, is that data stored, and when, finally, I guess, is the big question. Once you have all the others answered, when would we move production applications? When are we going to make this jump? When is the right time? So lots of questions to be asked and answered during this event. So hopefully we will answer your questions during this event. No pressure on our presenters to answer every single question out there. They've got a wealth of knowledge to share. I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Patrick Hubbard, head geek at SolarWinds. Patrick, great to have you. Also, Mr. Gijsbert Jansen van Doorn, Director for Technical Marketing at Zerto, and Mr. Alan Waters, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix. Patrick, Gijsbert, and Alan, really great to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump right into it with our first question of the day, and that is, have you seen any changing trends with cloud usage or adoption with COVID-19? Patrick, I'll hand it first over to you.
Sure. And it's an interesting time to answer this question because we just finished a fairly large survey of our user community, our thwack.com user community, about this. Because, obviously we were talking about cloud a lot, I think, as an industry all the way through last year. And to your point earlier about how long we would expect to see projects take to implement. And we were still, kind of hearing last year that, well, we'll be there in 6 months, or we'll be there in a year, or we have a strategy to X, Y, Z. But what customers were saying this year was that all of a sudden they were able to get things done a lot more quickly, or in fact, there was real urgency around cloud for the first time. So it's an interesting combination of opportunity with really much more mature and accessible cloud platforms, along with a real driver to actually do it that's moved a lot of people forward.
Excellent. That's good to hear. And I'm excited to hear more about this user survey that you guys did at SolarWinds, of course, throughout the presentation. Can you guys still hear me, actually?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, just turn off
Absolutely.
the camera here until I resolve this so you don't see lines. All right. So the next I'll hand that off actually to you, Heisbert. What have you seen changing with COVID-19?
Well, a lot has changed. When you specifically look at cloud adoption, and I wouldn't say necessarily trend because we've seen it before, but desktop as a service has exploded ever since the pandemic started. I've seen numbers with growths of 95%. And besides that, the ancient old infrastructure as a service is still growing and a steady grower there as well, especially now that a lot of companies, they either need to scale up, scale out somewhere, they might not even be able to access their own data center during certain lockdowns. So there's been some really interesting movements in the cloud space, especially with everybody working from home. Organizations really needed to adopt their infrastructure to those new needs that I almost hate to say it, but that new world where we, let's say, temporarily live in right now. So I think those were the two that really stood out for me.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, a lot more working from home than ever before these days. Alan, what's your take?
Yeah, and Heisberg kind of stole my thunder because obviously from a Nutanix point of view, we got a lot of our start from EUC, end user compute, desktop as a service, and of course, as mentioned, it's been growing like crazy. Some companies, went home on Friday and they had to have 500 users work from home, that Monday. So, but I think the key thing to think about there is, having the infrastructure to be able to scale like that and be able to change quickly like that, to be able to adapt. Of course, desktop as a service, those organizations that didn't have anything, that's a good way to go, right? Because they could get up and running quickly with that. That in-office workforce suddenly becomes a remote workforce. Other struggles that go along with that. Cloud security, is a huge priority that goes along with, I think, a lot of this end user compute and desktop as a service, so forth. But I totally agree that the end user compute, VDI, desktop as a service has been huge, big change.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I was interviewing actually a industry expert as well this morning, and he was saying, that innovation and digital transformation have just become a requirement, and that it's no longer, kind of an optional thing on the CEO's, wish list. This digital transformation initiative, digital transformation is just like do or die. And the companies that are doing it, in this changing, crazy time, they're going to win, and companies that aren't are going to fail. So great points all around. Thank you for that. I mean, obviously we've seen huge changes for all of us with the pandemic, but next question here on the list: how do we know if hybrid, public, or public cloud are the best choice for our company? Heisbert, you want to start with this one?
Oh yes, I think we're starting the "it depends" answer streak now, and it's really unfortunate. I have to say it depends. It all depends on what are you trying to achieve, what do you need to do, what are your requirements. I do see hybrid as the approach that most organizations start to adopt. It's their first step, whether it's, and I'm playing into Zerto's cards right now, but whether it's starting to use the cloud as a DR location, or starting to move certain applications to the cloud, combining it with your own on-premises solution and somewhere in the public cloud, or maybe an MSP somewhere, is something we see happening a lot. I think when you look at whether you are going to use hybrid or public cloud, we really need to look at, one, why am I doing it? And two, the cost of it as well, because it doesn't always make sense to run it in the cloud if on-prem it's either more cost effective or more secure, or there's many other things. But looking really closely at those requirements, picking the right public cloud, and I'm pretty sure we'll have a question about that one coming up as well, is all of these things that you need to take into account. Am I re-platforming? Am I re-architecting? It's one of those trends that I actually didn't talk about their previous questions. What we see is that a lot of the public cloud vendors out there now, for example, start offering VMware services, so running VMware workloads on their public cloud. And that's because not a lot of organizations are ready to completely re-architect or re-platform their application. So when you pick one of these choices, you need to look at your entire ecosystem, whether it's EUC, whether it's your enterprise applications, whether it's how everybody connects. There's so many dependencies there.
Yeah, great point. It's not like, oh, the data center's dead, everything's moving to the cloud. You really have to make smart choices. Alan, I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart. What about running, existing on-prem workloads in the cloud? How do we know if that's the best choice for us?
Yeah, and it's funny because over the past 6 to 8 months, we've kind of, especially with our new hybrid and our new clusters launch, we've moved from saying, hey, don't just give up on private. It's not the only thing. There's great reasons for on-prem private cloud. There's great reasons for public cloud. And a lot of times the conversation does come down to the applications, and looking at those specific applications. As was mentioned, we find that a lot of those applications that are legacy type of applications, more of a consistent type of demand type of application, those run cheaper on-prem. So when you come across, and we all come across the folks that say, well, I'm all cloud, I got to go all cloud. But when you start digging into it and you say, well, how many applications do you have? I have 200 applications. Is it really cost effective to move all those applications to the cloud? And you really have to look at them to figure out which ones make sense to stay on-prem and which ones make sense and are cost effective to move to the cloud. And of course, from a Nutanix point of view, having a platform to support both and to easily move applications between the two, is key, and helps solve a lot of the simplicity there.
Yeah, that sounds like the best of both worlds there, being able to run existing applications just as you did without changing them at all, and move them back and forth where you need to. Patrick, what about you at SolarWinds? Do you have tools, or how do you help people to kind of make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's mostly about taking the pain out of hybrid. And I think that's part of the reason that we always, any vendor should be answering this question by, well, it depends, or finding out what someone is doing, is that none of us really intended to buy hybrid. It's not a SKU. You didn't go get it. And instead, each organization follows its own path to cloud, right? It's going to be partially on-prem, or it's going to be, they think they're going to be all cloud, or they get a little taste of cloud and programmatic management and software actuated infrastructure. And they say, you know what? HCI, we're going to do hyper-converged. We're going to do that on-prem. Those set of choices are driven by business decisions, by what's appropriate for the business. And then the hybrid, in a lot of ways, is sort of the hand-waving hairball that gets created as a management issue for folks in IT. And so for SolarWinds customers, it's mostly about helping them figure out how they are going to not only maintain visibility and control over resources that could be located pretty much anywhere, but really there's a journey there, right? So they start primarily on-prem. They may actually do digital transformation where they're going to re-platform, maybe completely re-implement, or maybe they're going to adopt SaaS, or maybe they're just going to modernize and they're going to do some abstraction of application components, which may or may not be located in one stack on-prem. But the elements of that infrastructure actually change over time. And so what we're finding is that it's a really evolutionary process. And so it's more about making sure that they have the next thing that they're going to need to be able to monitor and manage as their infrastructure is developing. So for example, going back to the first example of lift and shift, you remember when people were saying years ago, cloud is cheaper, just move your VMs over to cloud. Well, in some cases that might be true, or you might have a really chatty application that's driving a lot of IOPS that all of a sudden you get an unexpected light bill from your cloud provider. And so being able to do comparative performance analysis, being able to help businesses make informed decisions about what's appropriate for cloud or what's appropriate to split with multiple cloud vendors versus consolidating on one, and just general streamlining, and then the basics of once you're hybrid, you are now worried about sprawl, and you're worried about utilization, and you're worried about, especially where you're paying by the hour for consuming services, are we right-sized for these workloads? Are our data storage tiers the way they're supposed to be? Are we thinking about security, left of deployment instead of, on-prem, the habit of, well, we'll get the gear out and then we'll go on the command line and we'll secure it? No, I mean, with cloud, you really need to be mindful about what you intend for users to be able to do with that data and those services. So really that goal is to be able to be there as they are on their cloud journey and as they are navigating those dark, unilluminated or at least unmonitored hallways of hybrid, to be able to maintain that same sense of control and just knowledge about operations that they've had for years on-prem. So let's talk about residential internet reliability.
The rise and fall of webcams.
We could talk a little bit about trying to decide whether hybrid, if you want to dig into that a little bit more, Patrick, or hybrid. How does an organization decide, do I go hybrid or do I go public? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. For most businesses, it really comes down to a couple things, right? Their size and their focus and willingness to absorb some, not necessarily development, but a lot more, whether it's configuration or management or really deep understanding and technical implementation of solutions, right? So if they're willing to absorb more of that, then the pain of hybrid isn't as great, or at least they're able to sort of map a business requirement along with their goals for that technology. If, on the other hand, they just want to get something done, and that more Salesforce model of, hey, we have this thing that's available as a service, and if you're willing to make some changes to your business processes and use this thing more or less out of the box, and that saves them time. I mean, it's not exactly working with an MSP, but it's certainly offloading that. That's where we are seeing most of our customers sort of making those decisions. And an example of that, for example, would be last year, the last IT trend survey we did, we were looking at how many customers were moving to cloud and which cloud providers they were using. And last year it was about 50% Azure, and then the rest of it kind of distributed. This year it was actually 2/3 Azure, which was interesting. And talking to a lot of those folks at Ignite and some other events last year, it was that idea that they, the products have come, that cloud services have become a lot richer and a lot easier to digest, but also the way that the cloud vendors are sort of presenting themselves to enterprise. I mean, certainly Oracle has talked about it a lot, but when you look at that Azure adoption, they are making those decisions, one, because they just are, trust the technology, or it's a technology stack that they're used to working with, or they're in the middle of consolidation where maybe they had multiple different cloud providers, or they had tried a multi-cloud solution, and they are just realizing that there's certain cost savings around selecting one. So there's a lot of different things that go into those decisions about which ones they pick. But to your point before about digital transformation, this is that first year where you're really starting to see real initiatives as a part of 2020. They're really providing concrete reasons why certain decisions around cloud are being made. And it's not, well, we think that, or we have anecdotal evidence that suggests, or we have a cowboy VP somewhere that came up with some cash and is going to do something that would have been rogue IT, but now it's going to effectively be a driven rogue cloud adoption. But instead, it's a lot more nuanced, and it's a lot more based on data and performance and business goals.
Great advice.
Funny you said the.
I was just going to ask, maybe, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, go ahead.
One thing, I was wondering if we should take a step back and kind of discuss the difference between, because we throw terminology around like hybrid, multi-cloud, public. Maybe if you want to give your feelings on the definitions that you use when you're talking about it.
Sure. So I don't know. Well, the first one, that I think we all see a lot is you'll hear multiple cloud and multi-cloud used together. And those are two very, very different things. And I think the majority, if you said for the majority of folks that we typically talk to, you said, oh, you're multi-cloud. So you've completely abstracted your workload so that they can operate in a generic fashion across, any number of PCPs based on cost and other factors. And you've taken on some work to be able to abstract those more complex services that aren't offered as, snap-in replacements across, an abstracted set of clouds. They will usually say, no, we have AWS and we have Azure and we have GCP. And effectively, they may even be with a single provider, but they have multiple VPCs or instances that are maybe not as connected as they ought to be. So for them, what most people are talking about when they talk about multiple cloud is that they have multiple different cloud providers. And then on-prem, I think we all know what that is, although is it? Right? Are a lot of on-prem services moving toward edge, where you're starting to deliver richer services at the edge? If you are effectively building your own private cloud, if you've gotten the API bug, if you've realized that, hey, a lot of the same upskilling that we did to be able to deploy to cloud to public cloud providers, we can actually do the same thing in-house, and there are things that are less expensive. I mean, why should the cost of delivering services are pretty much the same, whether it's Azure, Amazon, or your data center, ideally. But then do you want to pay profit to a third party on top of that if you can do it yourself?
Right.
Great points. It's important to know those definitions because, like you said, everybody's got a different definition. So good starting point there. Let's move on to our next question here. And this is a long one. Someone actually submitted this question, took a lot of time to write it. Is there a sweet spot where it makes more financial sense to go move to the cloud rather than on-prem? And is there an ROI or TCI calculator that can help? And what about a tool to compare between clouds? Heisbert, what have you seen?
So specifically with the organizations we talk to, is the number one reason they look at cloud is to start using the cloud as a DR site, because that as a first step, as tipping your toes into the cloud makes a lot of sense, especially with a solution like Zerto that allows you to simply consume only the cost-effective storage offering in the cloud, and then start using compute like the on-demand fashion of the cloud, only for failovers or failover tests, so really when you need to. And that's definitely something that a lot of organizations are looking at, because they have that second data center that's up and running just to wait for those workloads to, in case a disaster strikes, to move there. And that's when you see a lot of customers think about, I want to get out of that business of running my second data center. I don't want to do that anymore. Let's start looking at different solutions. there's many calculators out there. Let's be honest. I think most of the vendors out there that do cloud have some kind of TCO calculator online. We have a calculator online as well. But I think when you really look at clouds, you need to again, there it is. It depends, but you need to look at what is your workload now, and there's multiple tools out there that really can do that assessment, that can really show you the differences, and that can really give you insight into what cloud would be the best from a cost perspective, or don't move, stay on-prem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great starting point for any company, interested in the cloud is DR. It's like the low-hanging fruit of cloud migration. So great points. Alan, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, and from our organization's point of view, as you move to become a cloud operator, being able to see all the financials and being able to do chargebacks to all the different groups or end users, to everything, right? To power, to cooling, to how much an individual VM might be charging departments. Having a built-in tool to be able to do this helps tremendously. I mean, we had a customer install, our analysis product, and he said that out of all the different software products he had, being able to tell the CIO what he's spending and being able to see the different areas of spend, it was the single best tool that he implemented. And it's huge, especially as you and it's not just being able to see one cloud, right? It's having a piece of software, and we Nutanix happens to have one that can see your multiple clouds, right? On-prem, what's happening here, what's happening on AWS, what are the differences, what can I do for reserved instances here to maybe save some money here. So, sometimes when you're moving to the cloud, being able to see those pieces can be huge for organizations.
Absolutely, yeah. Visibility is a powerful thing. Patrick, what have you seen?
Well, the sweet spot, I mean, not to, bring out an old saw, but the sweet spot is always going to be the one, and especially, IT is the cost benefit center where they make tough decisions of what needs to be done for the business and can it be delivered affordably, right? And so and y'all can tell me whether you see this as well, but right now it seems to be sort of one of three categories. One, they either started early with DR, backup, offsite data storage, or they came a little bit later, and then maybe they adopted not a packaged application, but something like a database as a service, right? So something that would be considered a platform in and of itself, but to them it still looks like it's using the same tools and sorts of data and data constructs that they're familiar with. And then that last one, especially for early adopters or high performing teams, where they were actually all cloud or cloud native are really adopting and using cloud the way that it should be, with a lot of application transformation and really kind of all in on cloud. And so depending on how they came to it, that sweet spot could be about functionality. If digital transformation is the thing that they're really trying to achieve, where access, where being able to dynamically scale workloads, for example, to be able to do advanced orchestration, well then for them, being primarily or all cloud is a great solution. If on the other hand, they just have a set of services that are trying to extend, or maybe they want to solve a DR problem easily, then cloud can provide a great way to provide kind of base services without getting involved in a lot of engineering. And so the key, though, is don't ever trust any one cloud provider's estimates of what your costs are going to be for your workload. They are not you. They don't know what that workload is going to do. And so even things like instance definitions, like if you go look at AWS and Azure for the same machine, spec'd out the same way, sort of it's because it's equivalent, right? It's virtualized versus the server instance that you have sitting on-prem. They are all different. And so finding that sweet spot is as much about comparing what you know on-prem or what you know in one vendor versus what you see how that application works in another, is really the way of finding that sweet spot. Is use your app, look at the way that it communicates, look at where its performance bottlenecks are, look at how it's behaving to figure out whether it belongs on-prem, or do we even need to move it? Am I just moving it because I've been told that it's going to be cool, or is there a real business need behind it? So figuring out actual data-based usefulness measurements against a number of different competing reasons why people might want to adopt cloud can be really helpful to figure out what that sweet spot looks like in your organization between a whole lot of cloud and everything on-prem.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, everybody's sweet spot is going to be different, and don't trust cloud providers' tools or calculators that may be biased. Excellent. All right, let's see. Moving on here. Question number 4. For the typical business out there, not maybe your cloud first startup, do you see hybrid as a more realistic model? Heisbert?
I think we see it happen right now, and I think it is their number one model I see businesses adopt. And yes, it makes sense, whether it's from a cost perspective that they're looking at it, whether it's from a we talked a lot about digital transformation and the drivers, but whether they're looking at going through that digital transformation and building out new services because they want to adopt a new business model because, well, the world we live in currently requires them to. I saw a funny slide the other day. It's like, what's your number one driver for digital transformation? Is it the CEO? Is it the CIO? Or is it COVID? So that's one of them. But I do think that this is the first step that everyone makes. When you're running on-prem, where you're not that cloud-first company, the very first step you make will, let's say, 90% of the times be hybrid cloud.
Okay. I agree. Hybrid seems like the future. It's not public, it's not private, it's hybrid. I don't know. We've got a lot of questions. Alan, Patrick, do you want to add anything to that, or we want to keep on rolling?
Mine's pretty short, which is that hybrid is the future because it's effectively the de facto future, right? Because if organizations adopt anything outside of their firewall in terms of cloud, they are effectively now hybrid. There's no such thing as a little bit of hybrid. You either have it or you don't. The skills that you need in order to manage it are the same. And so pretty much I would tend to think that at some point, basically every business is a hybrid business. It's just a question of how much.
Absolutely. And Alan?
I tend to talk. Yeah, sorry. I tend to look at it a little bit differently and talk to it a little bit differently, just because when you're talking to an organization that has and I'll call it a legacy 3-tier type of infrastructure. Does going to hybrid simply mean moving applications to AWS and you suddenly have a hybrid infrastructure, a hybrid cloud? Is that the definition? So the way I like to present it, and mostly because I'm with Nutanix, is that I like to start with building out your private cloud. And as you build out your private cloud, make sure that private cloud can easily get to hybrid and get to a public cloud. Rather than creating more silos around a legacy 3-tier infrastructure. You might have a group managing AWS over here, a group managing workloads over here, and I don't think that simplifies things. But if you can move to a platform that kind of unifies it all, same management, moving the same workloads back and forth, I think that simplifies things quite a bit. So that's how I like to talk to it.
Great points. Okay, excellent. I'll just remain off camera here, but I'm still here. Let's move on to question number 5. Are there specific applications or use cases that are the low-hanging fruit of hybrid cloud? I know we talked about disaster recovery. Patrick, do you see anything else to add to low-hanging fruit list?
Sure. I mean, beyond storage and effectively using it as an MSP managing what would have been a remote data center. a lot of that tends to be, I mean, those first phases were lift and shift, right? They were, I'm going to just take this workload and I have an accessibility issue where I need to make it more available than if it was in my data center. So I'm just going to push the thing over. But we've kind of now seen enough time to know that might not actually be all that cost effective. So yeah, it's those first elements tend to be either early lift and shift, or at least maybe the first phases of application modernization, right? Where we're gonna move it over. Maybe we're going to have a set of API. We're gonna wrap it with APIs and then deconstruct it over time. Those are the things that tend to go there, or certainly storage, and definitely offsite. And databases increasingly too. That in the last couple of years, databases have really come on, just simply because the complexity of managing a highly scalable database infrastructure can be kind of high, and letting somebody else worry about that tends to be pretty attractive as well.
Yeah, I think sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the app modernization is an interesting one, because we see that happen with a lot of organizations as well, especially when you move into those new type of let's say next gen applications, where there's the DevOps teams and nothing goes fast enough. So they'll start developing in on let's say EKS, running a Kubernetes application, but then when it needs to be taken into operation, it actually needs to be moved back to their on-prem environment. So a database as a service is an interesting one as well. We've seen a lot of people adopt that, and then we see a lot of people say, ooh, we now have different requirements, or we found out a different model works great. How do I get out of it? So those are questions you have to look at as well. Once you adopt any type of cloud models, how do you manage both getting in, getting out as well? But I think test dev and an app modernization are definitely some of the use cases that are very low-hanging fruit for hybrid cloud.
Yeah, that's a great point. Once you get in, how do you get out? How do you migrate to something else? Very important questions to ask. Alan, I know you and I have talked about database as a service before. Do you see that as another good low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one, but I do like to kind of take a different look at kind of applications and kind of that low-hanging fruit, and kind of put a new spin on it, and look really at the attributes of those different applications to figure out, because it could be different between organizations, right? And there's 5 or 6 things to look at between applications. The function and type, the usage, the performance and the capacity needs. I think looking at those different pieces can help determine, which might stay on-prem, which might move to the cloud, the utilization, the growth, the cost of that application, of course, the security and compliance that might be associated with it. So there's a lot of different pieces that we like to look at when determining. Again, there are some low-hanging fruit, but when you're looking at the high level of different applications, there are different attributes to take into consideration to figure out which ones might be appropriate where. So,
absolutely, yeah, lots to consider there. Great points. Let's keep moving on here. Lots of good questions coming in. How do we prevent ransomware in the cloud, Patrick? Is that possible? Is there a switch we can flip just to prevent that?
Ransomware in the cloud. That feels like a good problem to get to eventually. I mean, I would start with, is cloud ransomware any different than anything else? And is the real challenge, that sort of low-hanging fruit of here for security, is like, how does an organization ensure that everyone on the team that's touching cloud resources actually understands IAM, right? The access model and the tools that you use to control visibility of resources and access, resources to the cloud, because this is not command line. adjusting ACLs in a router or a firewall. It's different. Now, once you get used to it, I find it to be a lot more straightforward. It's more declarative. It may even be deterministic, although you still need to be able to monitor whether or not it's doing that. Access and security is the way that you expect, and that people are not traversing your VPC firewall perimeter as another way in. But is ransomware in the cloud in and of itself a problem, or is it just the possible cost and visibility of a leak where everyone in the world might have access to information?
Good questions. Good questions. Heisbert?
I'm not sure if we could prevent anything related to ransomware if you look at the news. I think prevent is something a lot of people think about. I think one of the things that might not be as obvious, but is definitely something you need to look at, is how do I recover from ransomware? Because preventing is one thing. The other one is, okay, if it happens, how do I continue my business? How do I recover my data? How do I not pay ransom? I think it should be more of a cyber resilience approach versus a purely prevention approach. I mean, if you look at the NIST framework for cybersecurity, prevention is one of them. Recovery is another one. I think you need to take into account all of these aspects when talking about ransomware.
You make a great point. It's kind of like asking, how can I never get sick again? Right? It's like, well, maybe that's not very realistic. Instead, focus on how can I, recover quickly, or try not to get sick, kind of thing. Alan, what about your take there at Nutanix?
Yeah, I mean, we like to talk about there's a whole zero trust security design philosophy that basically assumes that any network, any application, any server is going to get compromised, right? So there's a whole design around looking at the different pieces from microsegmentation and different protocols and so forth. But you got to kind of look at it. We like to look at it as a whole. From the microsegmentation to identity management to all the different pieces, and really design a perimeter to help prevent it. But there's as was mentioned, there's a lot of different ways to attack it and try and prevent it.
Got it. And there's a question that came in here from I think it was from Jim, or it was actually from Ace out there. Ace is asking, what about encryption? Can encryption help to prevent ransomware?
I'll let Patrick take that one.
What? It's always me first?
It's so easy.
I mean, yeah. The answer is yes. Encrypt all the things, and then salt all the passwords, and make sure that the assets, downloadable assets, information and knowledge that can be taken from your cloud instance are more or less useless without a key. But teams are struggling now with the basics, and especially with ransomware, where maybe somebody is using a fairly standard naming convention and they are not carefully managing their keys. So you can encrypt all the resources, but if you don't have visibility into policy and whether basic governance around how things are stored, where they're stored, storage and network segmentation, like encryption is a great first step, but it needs to be part of a process of really thinking about security of okay, we're encrypting it because something bad could happen. Well, what are you going to really do about that? What are the business costs? And maybe that's one of the things that makes cloud low-hanging fruit in terms of a recovery option, is that if you're talking about a CloudFormation or a Microsoft Blueprint or something else where you have taken all of those configurations, all of those assets, all of the thought and research that went into how you were going to secure resources. Is this thing encrypted? And by the way, where are we storing the key? Recovery gets to be a lot easier because it's not exactly push button, but compared to manually rebuilding an entire infrastructure, it's a lot easier. So I think that being able to recover, and especially verifying that you can test recovery, is incredibly important. And with cloud, you can spin up a parallel environment where in production, on-prem, you might not have parallel hardware to actually completely test a complete recovery. but you can do that if you're going to temporarily use those resources in the cloud, or maybe whether it's in a public cloud or a private cloud.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, great answer. And moving on to the next question, that was really a common theme across all the hundreds of questions we received was security, security, security. Like, how do I know that this is really secure? Heisbert, any security tips when it comes to hybrid cloud?
Well, security is always the tricky part. I do want to touch a little bit on encryption for that. I mean,
Yeah,
ransomware does that for you. Encrypting your data, but I think encryption within the cloud, and Patrick touched a very interesting point, because the key management becomes really complex when adopting different technology. So you really need to think about, what am I going to encrypt? Where am I going to encrypt? How am I going to manage this? How am I going to manage this if I want to move out of that cloud? Here's the move out of that cloud again. From a security perspective, the network segmentation piece and micro-segmentation, what people talk about, is something you really need to look at. Networking is a big piece of how you get to the cloud and how you keep things in the cloud and not leak out of the cloud. Very important piece of that. I think another piece is, and that might sometimes be a reason why organizations adopt a cloud or move to the cloud, is the compliance piece of it. I've been in many compliance projects where people are trying to get certifications, and you need to make sure that your cloud provider has those same certificates, has those same compliance active on their sites as well. And sometimes they even have better ones, allowing you to deliver services to industries you've never been able to touch before, because you were simply not able to get that based on your own on-prem environment. So security is one thing when you look to network, data protection, and those kind of things. But the other one is also, how do I guarantee all the processes and handling of data and handling of information within my platform is another one.
Yep. Yeah, and I like to talk about them, and I typically group them in 3 different buckets when talking about security. And it was just mentioned. I mean, I like to talk about the platform side of it, and of course, there's encrypt the data at rest there. Make sure the platform's hardened. Make sure it can self-heal. There's a security baseline on that platform side of it. Then there can be the application side that we've mentioned a couple of times, microsegmentation, software-driven network microsegmentation. That's a piece of that. But then the third bucket is usually the whole multi-cloud security. And the cool thing that you can do is make sure all the policies that you've set follow the workloads around as you migrate, whether that workload's on-prem or if you move it up to AWS. Make sure those security policies follow them, and make sure it's easy to do. So those are usually the 3 buckets that I group the security piece in the 3 categories: application, platform, and then the whole multi-cloud security side of it.
Yeah, Alan, that's a great point, especially the idea of moving policy with applications, because that was always sort of the dream of virtualization, right? Which was, you're going to assign policy, cost, security, everything else about the way that application was going to work and the resources that it needed. And then somehow there was going to be an orchestrator or fabric or something that was going to take those requirements and then actually instantiate a running instance of that you could do something with. And so that idea of making sure that you were that you were thinking about security before you end up in a hybrid environment, so that it's not just visibility rules for something in a bucket somewhere, but it goes beyond that. And it's the express route network peering points. It is your internal application access that it is multi-point, and that those applications under hybrid, whether it's private or public cloud, now move. And it is so easy to lose security context. So things like security log aggregation, being able to extend policy, not just for cloud, but all the way down to across all of your existing distribution infrastructure for if you have a campus full of employees, if we ever get back to that, or folks working at home. I really like that idea of people looking at cloud, and especially looking at hybrid deployment, ought to be thinking about how to make those security definitions and policies that are associated with each application something that is entrained with that app as some sort of an artifact, so that anyone who touches it, who has never seen it before, understands what the business ramifications of loss of security for that application or that application's data might be, as well as functionally what it needs to have in order to run. So that would be secrets management, key management, and maybe even just from a troubleshooting perspective of, one, you need to keep the environment safe, but those sort of security configurations can actually end up taking applications down. I mean, we still are the number one, we in technology who are on keyboards are still the number one cause of outages. Just look at the news. And so when someone's trying to figure out why an application suddenly stopped working because a key has changed, or a VPN tunnel has collapsed because it hasn't had its keys renewed in a while, being able to say this application includes this set of security policies and artifacts can be really, really handy.
I think he's back.
So I can see, while David's coming back, I see Jorge asked a question about companies considering selling some of their buildings to work from home. Is that accelerating cloud adoption? And I think that's part of what we discussed earlier. End user compute, VDI, desktop as a service, the huge growth there. And hey, if people aren't going back to the office and you've got some huge leases that you're paying, if the organization is paying huge leases, yeah, absolutely. I know my son, for one, they're not renewing their lease where he's working, and they're all staying at home going forward. So yeah, it's a great question.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I was saying we've got 6 minutes left here. I think we've officially reached the lightning round. So let's see how many of these questions maybe we can get through relatively quickly. Patrick, how do we know what's going on in the hybrid cloud? Any suggestions?
In terms of your specific hybrid cloud, yeah. I mean, so I think the first thing is to start thinking about visibility of operations a little bit differently. I mean, I have written a lot about observability and visibility, but I'm not going to do that. But just simply think about zooming back your understanding of monitoring, and start thinking more about appropriateness of how you intend to get data based on the application. So that if this is mostly cloud native, if it's cloud first, if it is predominantly cloud, you might not really need to focus a lot on infrastructure monitoring or traditional infrastructure monitoring. You might want to be focused on application performance monitoring, end user experience, being able to really look at multipath network management, that kind of thing. But if, on the other hand, you are accessing most of your applications still on-prem, then that's going to be a different, and a mix of traditional infrastructure monitoring along with cloud is going to be important. So for example, let's say you have a non-express route connection between on-prem data center, private cloud, and a cloud provider, right? Typical hybrid. And your application is down and you see that it's a VPN error. Well, is it really a VPN error, or is it a collapsed VPN tunnel? And being able to figure out and isolate what the problem is with that VPN is going to actually bring the application back online, because there's authentication or some sort of patient record or something else that the organization really wants to keep on-prem. So that kind of troubleshooting requires it requires everything that you need about on-prem, but it's also now monitoring essentially without root access to resources that are a part of the cloud. So it's really a rethinking of the way, or expansion of the way that you think about visibility is probably the step one to be able to make sure that you know what's going on in your particular hybrid cloud.
Excellent advice. All right, thank you. Let's see, we'll move on here. I've got some questions maybe tailor-made for each one of you, or handpicked. Alan, what about this? How do we actually move data between on-prem and public cloud? Any recommendations, tools?
Yeah, and I like to talk about how, I talk about how Nutanix does it, right? So with our hybrid cloud, and you have, you have the hybrid cloud with, say, AWS, or you have it with Azure. So the way the platform works is if you have a VM running on-prem, and that's something that might be a better fit on AWS, it's a matter of simply dragging it up and moving it to AWS using the same VPCs, the same account, and setting up a hybrid cloud between your on-prem hyper-converged Nutanix platform and AWS can literally be done in less than an hour. And when that happens, then you can start moving your VMs between on-prem and AWS. We're going to have Azure later in the year. So if a workload is a better fit on Azure, move it down from AWS to a cluster on-prem, then move it up to Azure as needed. No retooling, no re-architecting. So for me, I drink the Nutanix Kool-Aid. When I hear, hey, how do you move workloads? I'm like, hey, it's easy, right? So that's the way I look at it, especially when you've made the move and transformation to HCI with Nutanix.
Excellent. All right. And then time for just a couple more questions. This one, Gijsbert, it's for you. What about disaster recovery and data protection? Any tips there?
Oh, absolutely. So I drink different Kool-Aid, but it's still a very good one. So it can make it really easy if you use the right platform, and use a platform that's agnostic. And yes, I'm with Zerto, so we do offer a great platform that allows you to just do that. Really easy disaster recovery, data protection, whether you want to use the cloud, when you want to do it on-prem or whatever cloud, or even between clouds. I think that's something that we make easier, and the cloud can definitely help there with their, some of the unique things like the on-demand piece of it, like the pay-per-use piece of it. That makes sense, and if you pick the right platform to do that for you, to help you achieve that, then yes, it will make it easier.
Excellent. And then,
and we can prove it. To go to our hands-on labs, you can actually do a failover to Azure within 20 minutes.
Very nice. I like it how all of you are helping companies out there to make cloud easier. Let's move on. Final question. 1 minute left. In one sentence, Patrick, what do you see changing in the next 5 years?
Over the next 5 years, cloud becomes consumable enough that virtually any organization can take advantage of it.
I like
what
it.
I mean by that is, right? So from manageability to visibility to cost to just where do you get started? That's what the cloud providers are all seem to be focused on, and that includes both on-prem, private, as well as public.
Awesome. Alan, care to make a prediction on the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think a big one is going to be unifying the management between all those different clouds and workloads, rather than having an interface over here for one, interface over here. But I definitely think the unifying all the different management pieces is going to be huge.
Very well said. Gijsbert?
I think a combination of both of those is actually what I'm looking at. It's unifying the management. It's going to be easier to consume, but it's going to be really hard to protect and move as well. I think one thing I don't see changing is that in 5 years from now, we'll still have very interesting panelcasts talking about cloud happening regularly. That doesn't change, but it's going to be a topic. It's going to stay a topic that's on the top of the minds of many people in IT for the next 5 years or 10 years even.
Well said, all the way around. Very wise, very expert advice. Before we go, I do want to announce the winners of our 3 Amazon $100 gift cards. They are Timothy Gary from Indiana, Sean Van from California, and Peter Dayton from California as well. I'll reach out to deliver those prizes. Thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us. And of course, thank you to our expert panelists, Alan from Nutanix, Heisbert from Zerto, and Patrick from SolarWinds. Great job all around. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.